So, welcome everyone to the panel on NFTs. I'm delighted that you could all join us. I am Dan Keeler. I'm the editor-in-chief at Blockworks, which is a news publication focused on crypto, blockchain, and all related technologies. I'm joined here by a couple of real experts in the blockchain-related media sector. We have Dwayne Desaulniers, who is the director of Web3 Blockchain and Data at the Associated Press. He's been working specifically in this space for years and has a deep understanding of the technology and its potential uses. So very excited to hear what he has to say. Zack Guzman is the author of the Facebook newsletter Crypto Uncomplicated, and he's a former anchor and reporter with Yahoo Finance and CNBC, who recently left Yahoo to build out a Web3 media startup. So he's staking his livelihood on Web3, which is a pretty bold move and should ensure he has a clear view of the benefits and pitfalls of this new space we're all trying to understand. As I mentioned, I'm the editor-in-chief at Blockworks, and before that, for about 8 years, I was the frontier markets editor at the Wall Street Journal, which is where I first heard about and started to understand the power of blockchain-based technology. So this panel is about NFTs. We have a lot of people listening from around the world who also want to learn about Web3 more generally. So while we'll focus heavily on NFTs and their application for journalism, we'll also have a pretty good look at Web3, how you build in Web3, and why you would want to. It's something that I think a lot of journalists are questioning and quite excited about, but obviously it's a very, very gray area. It's fast moving technology and we're all learning as we go, which is what I hope we're going to be doing for the next 45 minutes. Just as a piece of housekeeping, we're going to assume that everybody listening has at least a very basic understanding of blockchain technology, but we're also going to explain the concepts of NFTs, Web3, and so on. So please bear that in mind. Hopefully we'll strike the right balance so you won't feel we're oversimplifying, but also I want to make sure that we don't overcomplicate things and lose people who are perhaps still new to this technology. So enough with the promises. Let's start to deliver. Dwayne, I'm going to put you on the spot here to explain what an NFT is and how it could possibly be relevant to journalism. And if in the meantime, you could just give us a quick rundown on how you got into the role that you're into, which I think what that you're in is, which is extraordinary, fascinating.
Yeah,
that would be great.
You bet. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. A real pleasure to be here. As Dan said, this is how we're all learning about, this new portfolio of technologies and its application, just by meeting and talking and exchanging war stories and especially ideas. So it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. I'm a journalist by training. I've been in newsrooms since I was about 18 years old. But mid-90s, I just sort of fell in love with the impact of the web and how it was going to affect our industry. None of us really knew thoroughly how things were going to shake out. But it was just a really sort of appealing side of the business that I just really fell in love with. And I've been doing that ever since, biz dev, media tech work at the Canadian Press, WebMD, and of course here at the AP. We started to look at blockchain tech in sort of early 2020. And that was because it was related to the US 2020 elections. And I can describe that use case in just a little bit. But one thing I do like to share with everyone, AP is looking at this purely from is this technology applicable to help our business and help our industry? This has been a characteristic of AP ever since 1848. News distribution is something that we've always been really, really heavily focused on, for obvious reasons. We started with the Pony Express, and then we shifted over to telegraph, and telephone and all those subsequent technologies. So, we sort of see blockchain as simply the next step in that sort of ongoing exercise. Is this, will this help with revenue? Will it help with advertising? Will it bring readers and newsrooms closer together? Will it protect journalists more? So those are the sort of questions that we're interested in. So, we're not a poster child for crypto or the blockchain at all. Like, we're here just to see if the technology can help in any way. And the work that we've been doing has been focused on proving that out. So the very, very first thing we did had nothing to do with NFTs, but it had everything to do with, if the blockchain is this really secure, impenetrable, censor-proof, network, platform, storage, archive, whatever you want to call it, then that sounds kind of important for journalism. And our very first test was to document, to put on a blockchain, the race calls that AP made in 2020. So we didn't put sort of the live, vote by vote data on chain.
The US presidential election you're talking
Yes, exactly.
about, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
So a pretty contentious election with lots of questions about veracity and the results perhaps being doctored and bias. And
yeah, and it was fascinating because we didn't really anticipate the depth of those questions. In the summer of 2020. So it actually turned out to be a really, really interesting exercise as a result of sort of how the election unfolded, and certainly in the weeks and months after. So that was the first thing that we did, and it was really just to say and make a statement: hey, we have this really important journalism, and we don't want anything to happen to it. We don't want it to disappear. We don't want it to be censored. We don't want it to be hacked or altered. So this was the very first thing that we did. And then we got into NFTs after that. So that was the progression from the blockchain to NFTs.
Just on that subject, I mean, you're talking about using the blockchain to create this immutable record of the results that you called in the election. Who had access to that? Like I understand the excitement around getting something that's a permanent record and that is unchangeable and unhackable and whatever, but what's the point unless you've got a really good use case for it? So what would be the use case for that?
Sure. So there's a bunch. Now we did in 2020, so there wasn't a lot of folks on chain looking, for election results. The project was really well received by the industry just because of its intent and purpose. So back then, what we learned is, largely it was researchers that would tap the content that we published on chain. Believe it or not, one of the markets that used that data was the predictive betting markets. It's not necessarily a community that we pursue with vigor, but these were folks who the software that they were using for their betting needed to know from a trusted source, who won each election, who won each race. So that was one of the first audiences that consumed the race call data that we put on chain, and it was to settle a lot of predictive market work. Going forward, another example of that would be, with NPR PBS, we're gathering evidence of war crime in Ukraine. So that's another, I think, obvious candidate for us to consider moving onto the blockchain. To, again, largely symbolic at this point, but nonetheless, I think, important symbolism to be sure, in order to preserve that evidence and the work that our teams have done in Ukraine. Onto the NFT side. So yeah, the first time I mentioned to my bosses that we should consider the use of NFT technology, so non-fungible tokens. They literally thought I was talking about mushrooms, or that I was on them.
Can you give us the explanation you gave to them to explain what a non-fungible token is?
Yeah, you bet. So there's a super technical answer, and I'll not touch that with a 10-foot pole. But this is really a certificate of ownership of an item, largely a digital item. So I collected hockey cards as a young Canadian, and an NFT really is just a certificate piece of software that says Dwayne actually owns that hockey card. That's his. The ownership could be anything. It certainly started, as photos and art, but man, folks are now creating NFTs for houses, like for physical goods and objects, houses and whatnot. But what it really comes down to is, imagine, we're living in a digital world, and all these, younger generations, that's what they know. That's where they live. They're sort of digital native, as they say. And so much of their life is baked into, those technologies and those platforms and the culture. But one thing that they've not really ever been able to get that other generations have is, in their digital lives, proof of ownership of a digital item. We all buy a house and there's a deed, and it's a piece of paper largely, and it proves that we own that house. These folks that are growing up in a purely digital world, they also are really craving for proof of ownership because it's so easy to copy and steal digital things. It's a right click on a mouse and then game over. So I think this is the attraction of NFTs, is it gives this new generation, a way to claim ownership, display ownership, and prove ownership of an item that and otherwise could be infinitely copied and repeated.
But I think in the context of journalism, like I'd love to hear your thoughts on NFTs specifically for sort of stories and facts and ideas that are expressed through journalism, because it's almost like you want it the other way around. In art and performance art and that sort of thing, you're using an NFT to protect your rights to the property, to prevent it being copied and just shared or apparently owned by multiple different people, stolen effectively. But in journalism, I would imagine what we're hoping to do is to actually use an NFT to maintain the integrity of the piece of content itself, but to share it and spread it as widely as possible. It's ironic it's the other way around. So I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, so some of the earlier projects that some of the organizations like the Post and the Times were doing were focused very much on provenance of that. So proving the authenticity and the integrity, largely of photos. And that's really, really important, of course, because, some of the fakes today, especially on the video side, are just mind-blowing. I mean, undetectable to the naked eye that something is fake and someone is saying something that's completely bogus. Very dangerous stuff. So one of the early use cases and a lot of work that went into it was to figure out how to use the blockchain in NFTs to display and prove that a photo is a totally legit New York Times photo or AP photo or Washington Post photo. And that's a great goal. It's a good, noble goal. I think in practical terms, though, what we've not yet seen is broad consumer demand for that, frankly. We know that we can do that. We know that if you publish a photo on a website, you can render a display to show that that photo is unique and truly from the AP. But yeah, in terms of doing that, applying it, thus far, I don't think a lot of newsrooms have seen a huge demand for that. But we know that it's coming, and I think that'll continue to be an important.
So we've got a lot of working journalists on this call, and people who are in news organizations in one capacity or another. And I think that, one of the most important questions is the practical one of, okay, so we as journalists understand the importance of this technology. We get the idea of maintaining the integrity of your content, maintaining the integrity of what you're sharing with the public. How do we go about doing that? Like you guys have been working on this. If I'm a photographer and I've got some, great photographs that I want to make sure are immutable and aren't changed and do not get doctored, how do I do that?
Sure. So it is a bit of a technical lift for sure, and I think that's another challenge that we face broadly. I work at a large organization, and fortunately we have the resources to dig into this. Although what I'll say is that to share with everybody that our efforts to partner technically to get these projects up and running and done, that's what we've done. This has not been anything that we've done with in-house technical talent. But the good news is there's a lot of technology firms out there that are very eager to help with these concepts and with these ideas. So that's just made it, frankly, it's made a lot of this really possible. And that's just really practically important. I mean, I don't think we could afford to do a lot of what we've been able to do had we had to put a bunch of cash on the table and hire companies and whatnot. So, when you are exploring this, keep that in mind, because there are folks that are eager to help, and companies that want to have that experience and see the results along with you. So, some of the core things that folks need, of course, is a wallet. So there's this concept of a digital wallet that's uniquely yours, provably yours. It's a bit of a hassle to set up a wallet. It's still not particularly easy, and there's a number of wallets that you could choose from, and that's confusing, in and of itself. But that's sort of one of the key initial steps that anyone would have to take if they want to start working with this technology and minting or publishing, photos, is to get yourself set up with a wallet. Some of the more popular ones, and not pushing any brands in particular, but certainly MetaMask is a very popular wallet. Coinbase has a wallet, and so on. So easy to find some research on that. But that would be the very first step.
Yeah, and that's the first step that's going to put off a lot of people, I think. I mean, I've personally investigated, I'm reasonably tech savvy. I've personally investigated how you get hold of these wallets, what NFTs, how they work, how you mint one. And it's a lot of work. I think we need to get to the point where someone like AP creates a system, sort of front end for journalists like the rest of us, that we can just easily tap into this kind of technology without having to become technologists. And I think that's a role that
right.
I'd love to see an organization like yours perhaps perform.
Right. There is a firm, let me just name drop one company that I have been working with, and that's exactly what they're trying to do. Just make it, a white glove service to publish content on a blockchain. And it's R-Drive, so ardrive.io. And that's what their objective is to take the hassle and the mess and the noise out of it, and to try and make it as simple as an upload, basically.
And just for full disclosure, you've got no financial interest in this particular firm? Good, no. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, exactly.
Product plugs are fine, but I don't want any any kind of unethical stuff going on. So I'm anxious of the fact that we've got Zack sitting here quietly and patiently waiting to jump in. Zack, thanks, Dwayne. Zack, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Firstly, when you first heard about the concept of using NFTs in media, and given you're actually a publishing journalist and you're in the world of Web3, how do you think NFTs could best be deployed by journalists in the service of both their own art and the readers that they serve or viewers?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear Dwayne's thoughts through all that, kind of looking through the lens of an already established and major, news organization, and kind of where I'm at now, having left, two pretty big names in CNBC and Yahoo Finance, to kind of start to unlock what some of the technology does for people who are looking to start their own things right now, which I think is kind of where a lot of the excitement around NFTs and Web3, I think, comes from and is rooted in, is kind of ground up projects and what it unlocks. Obviously there's a lot of things there for blockchain technology to be used to help prove the legitimacy of a lot of these things. As Dwayne said, whether it's hockey cards or clips or photos, whatever it is, could be anything in the world. And we're seeing that now. I think that kind of speaks to the fact that nobody really knows what it's going to be best used for, or what the best opportunities are out there right now to kind of use the technology to help add real value. Because as we're kind of seeing in some of the questions here, there are other ways to legitimize things. And obviously, there are old ways of doing that, whether it's for a house or for memorabilia or whatever. There are centralized institutions or government institutions that their job is to prove authenticity on a lot of these things. For me, though, and particularly what I kind of quit my job for, was to go explore kind of the community aspect. So as Dwayne said, you can use an NFT to buy ownership of an item, but you can also very easily see how it could be used to get ownership into a community, or ownership to access paywalled or gated information, whether it's coming from a trusted news outlet like an AP, or if it's coming from just a group of individuals who are really good at what they do, independent contractors who may be independent journalists who are just really good. A very popular one that I've been following is a group of wallet sleuths who just track public transactions on blockchains and put together information on who controls those wallets and what those transactions mean, and then put all of their work together, and then they attach a token to it. In this case, an NFT information token is one of the projects out there, and it just attracts a bunch of smart people, and you start to build on that. And it kind of gets to this question of what exactly do these communities, organizations, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, what do those unlock as we kind of get into this new chapter of Web3? And I know we can go down what exactly all that means later on in this panel, but I think that that's kind of, to me, an exciting piece of what NFTs unlock is the ability to actually have ownership as an NFT holder here in whatever that DAO is building. And so for me, I guess personally, it's true. It's taken a lot of little tiny learnings along the way. You don't really understand what Web3 unlocks unless you understand what a blockchain does. You don't understand how that all works unless you have the wallet. You don't understand basically any of this unless you kind of were attracted to the space, whether it's because Bitcoin's price has absolutely exploded over the last 10 years or whatever. And so, for me, my journey started when my brother gave me half a Bitcoin as a graduation present. That got me thinking about, okay, my brother gave me a $300 gift that is now worth much more. What's going on there?
Even today, Zach?
It's still worth more, even today, although we're back to, I guess, where we were in 2018. So a lot of that value has come down, which gives my brother far less bragging rights for his gift back then. But still, it is appreciated. But I mean, since then, we've seen a lot of experiments that have proven kind of what this technology can be used for. And the one that really triggered me was probably, I think, one that got a lot of news coverage, but confused a lot of people as well. It was the Constitution DAO, which, I think for a lot of reasons deserved news coverage because it raised more than $40 million in a matter of days. And I think unlocked a lot of people's curiosities around, well, what does that do? What can you do when you have the ability to raise that much money in a short amount of time and also have proof of ownership over whatever that, that DAO eventually does? In this case, it was to buy a replica of the US Constitution. But if you channeled some of that energy into maybe a more thought out, like, what do we want to accomplish? Groupthink. It unlocks a lot of different things around Web3. And so that for me was just a point where I started to think about, all right, how could you apply this to media? What would that do to kind of address some of the concerns that I think we're all seeing in the media space right now when it comes to bias, and kind of, I guess, letting the audience kind of start to weigh in on some of the storylines as well. So it's kind of unlocked a lot of interesting use cases here, and that's kind of why I decided now was a good time to kind of jump ship and start exploring them, get my hands dirty myself.
Yeah, it's all of what you said is super fascinating. I mean, it's the potential that I get really excited about, and particularly the potential of using NFTs to, for example, find a way around censorship. There was a recent story about some people in China who were in lockdown, the sort of extreme lockdowns they've been experiencing there. Anything they posted on social media or online was just being erased and deleted. And one of them came up with the idea of actually creating NFTs of videos of what they were experiencing. And using that technology, they were able to prevent the censors from erasing it, which I think, it's a very sort of rudimentary example of how NFTs can support the sort of independent nature of journalism, the role of journalists to get the story out. I think my connection might be a bit unstable. I don't know whether. Yeah,
looks good. You're good, Dan. From my perspective.
On my end.
Okay, good. As long as you can hear me, that's the most important thing. We've had a couple of questions in from the audience, and I want to make sure that we don't not get a chance to get to those. So I'm going to choose the longest one first, which I think is for Dwayne, from John Lowenstein. How do you see large-scale platforms like AP helping to create or participate in large-scale journalistic monopolies? Would AP consider partnering on a searchable platform that includes other photojournalists, but not be connected beyond the search mechanism? So I think that is kind of leveraging the reach that you have, and effectively giving smaller journalists or independent journalists the opportunity to compete with the large stock agencies?
Yeah, for sure. So the answer is yes. Earlier this year, we launched our own NFT marketplace, and we partnered with a tech company called Zua, and we launched that in January. The first phase of that, John, was to showcase AP photojournalism. Very specific images, historic images, just really important images. That photojournalist enthusiasts wanted to collect and own. Technically, they don't own the photo, so this is an IP and licensing is a really important part of this. In all the work that we've done, we're not selling copyright. We're basically selling a personal use license, but with a twist. The owner can resell that license, and we've never had that licensing mechanism at our disposal before. That means that AP would make money if the owner resold that NFT, and that transaction would happen automatically. You don't have to go chase the new owner to get your share of the transaction. The money just flows automatically. But certainly phase two is really absolutely. We've had many discussions with a lot of other groups. Minority communities, communities that don't necessarily have an easy time of getting into the mainstream media. And bringing forward those stories for sure is something that we're keenly focused on. And then the broader question as well, and this sort of gets to the Web3, the membership, the network, that Zack was describing. It's all to be seen, but I think there's really, really compelling evidence out there that down the road, in the not too distant future, we are going to see communities of folks interested in news, and it may be around niche topics and like climate, for example. But we really do see the potential for a much more engagement with those audiences, more engagement between the news consumer and the photojournalist or the reporter. And we've seen proof of that. When we minted and licensed some of our photos, we also set up these Twitter spaces where we could talk to the folks who were buying it or interested in buying the photo. And I've never seen such amazing engagement between a journalist and a news community as those Twitter spaces. They were wildly popular. Everybody was happy. The collectors were so enthusiastic to have heard directly from a journalist, to ask questions of the journalist. And certainly the journalists loved hearing the feedback. And the questions were even technical in nature. What camera did you use? How do you capture that shot? So yeah, that's the most exciting part to me, John, is I think, the collective efforts that this potentially could lead to around news gathering, news vetting, and then even news distribution for sure.
This is something that I feel like is a thread running through this conversation and many others related to blockchain technology, which is that an awful lot of this stuff works perfectly well in Web 2. You don't need Web 3 to have a Twitter Spaces discussion with your audience. You don't need Web 3 to have a database that's pretty secure against invasion by foreign actors or whoever. You can just take it offline if you really want to. So the question keeps occurring to me, and I see this all the time in the industry that I'm focused on, which is obviously crypto. A lot of the time I just feel this question of like, is this people applying a really cool technology to a problem that could be solved in other ways? I saw this in the early days with some of the land registry around using blockchain. So you could just do that in an Excel sheet. Like the functionality is not, you don't need blockchain for that functionality. So you guys are, AP particularly, you're exploring what you can do with this stuff. But at the edge of what you're saying, I'm hearing this sense of like, yeah, we could have done this with another technology. We don't necessarily need the blockchain for this. So, frankly, do you feel like at the end of all this exploration, we might get to the point where it's like, yeah, what we have is really good as long as we manage it well. Blockchain is useful for some very specific use cases. Or do you think it will just end up underlying everything?
I think it's the latter. So certainly we pick our spots. You know, it makes no sense, and it's quite dangerous actually for us to think about just publishing the regular newswire on chain. We would not want to do that. One reason is because, at least at this point, it's super expensive to publish information onto a blockchain. And you know, we're AP journalists are producing 1,000 stories a day, and we would have to literally pay to get each one you know, on chain. So that's just not going to work. But the other more important concern is the blockchain is theoretically immutable. You can't erase anything from it. I mean, that's one of the pros and most interesting parts of you know, sort of that technology and that database. So if we went and published something that we later had to correct, big problem. Like, you know, so it's not for everything. You know, I think the election race calls, it's a very specific use case, Dan. You know, if investigative journalism evidence that's been collected, i.e. like some of the war crime photography videos from Ukraine. Again, I think that's another really good applicable you know, type of content that could be and should be considered to be published. But yeah, you're right. It's just not for everything, at least not yet.
Yeah, I might jump in on that one too, Dan, because I think it's fair to point out. I mean, it's important for people to point out where some of this seems like you're putting a, you know, square peg in a round hole, where it's like you could do that if you want to. But I think there was a lot of NFT excitement, and I think a lot of people saw ways to make money in the early kind of launch around NFTs, and the excitement around Beeple and everything else was, okay, we can make this an NFT. But the question now that I think people are asking is, well, should you on a lot of these things? And for me, particularly, just when you think about media and kind of, I guess this is less on the journalism side, but more so on kind of the virality side of some of these things, just like when you talk about how some of this stuff scales, if there is ownership there. So like, I just think about Squid Game as kind of an example, as like a show that really no one probably would have had on their radar. You know, it's on Netflix, whatever, but you hear about things through word of mouth, and your friends tell your friends, and something scales that way. And particularly with Web3 and NFTs around that is kind of the ownership aspect, which is new, I guess. There is no reward to kind of passing along content that you enjoy to other like-minded individuals necessarily for you. You're helping your friend, but you don't get any economic value out of it. But it does kind of start to be exciting when you think about, all right, well, what if I owned the upside in whether it's, you know, an article, or whether it's a content creator that's really nailing it but doesn't have a lot of followers yet, and you see that and you play a part in helping them scale, and you share their content and you get rewarded for it. There's a lot of ideas around that right now that I think does kind of break from the norm, and is kind of a use case that NFTs and that technology does unlock, because as Dwayne said, you can kind of finally start to track some of that through wallets, and that technology does start to unlock, I think, a lot of collaboration and upside and scalability.
Yeah, I think I'm frozen at this point.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think, you know, for me, a really, really fundamental theme that runs through all of this, and I think that'll be really important in dictating where this all goes. And that is, you know, why was the blockchain sort of and crypto, Bitcoin originally created? And that was a very specific response from a very specific technical community to the Great Recession. And more particularly, in their perspective, how the banks screwed everyone and how the government let them get away with murder. This was the start of blockchain and crypto culture. You know, so what these very technical people said is, man, we're getting hosed here. Can we use technology so that we can just work among ourselves? And we don't need, you know, a bank to be skimming off the top or whatever. You know, we don't need a central government to run everything. So that's what blockchain and crypto is all about. Is in this word of decentralization. It means moving the middleman out and connecting like the three of us on this Zoom call right now. You know, there's no one in the middle here. If that culture persists, if people continue to believe that, yeah, we should be able to transact commercially directly with each other without having to go through a bank or a credit card company, if that culture, if that vibe, if that mission, continues and really catches on and expands, then I think there's a really interesting future for this whole technology. But at the end of the day, if people say, oh, yeah, we hate centralized entities, but you know what? We kind of need them. We need a bank. The technology can do it all magically, but I want to have a bank. If that cultural view and opinion persists and doesn't change, then the blockchain will stay on the periphery, and it's not going to be anything that's going to really make a meaningful difference in the economy.
I think it's like everything. It's going to be, the end result will be a mix. We're seeing with the meltdown in the crypto markets at the moment that the overall feeling is like, oh no, this thing is just collapsing. But actually, if you look a little more closely, there's certain elements of it are, and it tends to be the elements that are based on unsustainable business models that, with hindsight, you can look back and say, well, actually, that looked pretty unsustainable from the start. So I think, we'll see a blend of different technologies, and the benefits of the blockchain-based technology. I think we will start to really understand what it is as people like you and both of you and all the people on this call start to experiment with it more. One of the things that excuse me, that I find quite interesting about it is the idea of ownership, is the idea of creators being able to earn revenue, and possibly recurring revenue when the results of their creativity are shared. We've got a reader or listener question, which is there a lot of revenue to be earned in selling personal use? And then is the secondary reselling market also a real profit margin? Or does this cannibalize syndication? Or does it cannibalize effectively the regular subscription basis? I feel like that. I'd love Zack's thoughts on that, actually, given that you're building a business on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to connect the dots around an NFT as a subscription versus, the old way of doing things and just kind of signing up through, your New York Times account or Washington Post or AP, whatever it may be. But the idea of having that to resell, I don't think a lot of people would get excited by it necessarily. Obviously, if you have unlimited amounts of subscriptions available, there would be no real point to kind of ever buy one and have the ability to sell if you can just cancel. But I think what is interesting beyond that is kind of, I guess, the ability to let, if you think about where Netflix is going with their password sharing and everything else, there is a way to monitor it with kind of NFTs being used around that. As far as, applying a Web2 kind of journalism or media model to Web3 is interesting because it unlocks a bunch of different things. And I don't know how everyone on the call feels about advertising in media or journalism, just because a lot of, I think, any page you have, if it's not all subscription revenue, will have an aspect of advertising in it. And I think a lot of people might say it is a disadvantage to the reading or viewing experience to have that thrown in there when you're trying to read a story. It doesn't exactly align incentives. And when I think, to Dwayne's point, like a lot of crypto is built around, yes, decentralization, but I think it's also just kind of built around aligning incentives. The whole idea of, oh, this person's not going to, run away with all the money in this crypto project because it would, if they have their money staked, it would hurt them as equally as it would, everyone else kind of attaching their own money to this project. So when I think about how you align incentives in some of these things, it unlocks other revenue streams that could exist in Web3 that may not have been there before, when you have a very intimate connection with your reader. When you have the information of what their wallet is and how you can interact with that. And as some, Web3 creators right now are kind of experimenting with, they are seen as bastions of truth, right? And they're content creators, but they're reporting on the news, and they're almost as respected as some of these other crypto publications out there. They may be one person or multiple, but people trust them. And now that when you trust somebody like that, it allows them to kind of stake with you. Some of these people are running validators and earning revenue off of money that their viewers are staking with them to kind of help secure a network. So it's unlocking a totally different way of thinking about how do you monetize trust. Really, at the end of the day, I think that's what journalism is. You you can lose trust so quickly if you misreport a story. So you're seen as a trusted entity, whether you're a big name or a small name, people trust you to deliver on the news. And if trust is really what you're selling at the end of the day, what does that unlock from a revenue model beyond just, writing an article or publishing a video? What else can you unlock there? So I think that as I think about this, is kind of what we as journalists represent, is we're all kind of adhering to the laws of trust and making sure that we get facts out and we fact check these things. And that's really where our energy is spent, I think, but it unlocks a lot, and it's exciting.
That's so important and so interesting. Talking of trust, I mean, a very practical question from one person in the audience is: do journalists photojournalists specifically in this case, but I'd say journalists generally, get royalties from images that AP has sold as NFTs? So for journalists generally, that would be content that AP has sold as NFTs, and for photojournalists, it would be images. Do they get royalties for that?
Yes, yeah. So when we rolled out our marketplace, there was two broad misconceptions that we went to battle with on Twitter. One was that we were ruining the environment, and the second was we're ripping off content creators, by developing this new revenue stream and not sharing. So wrong on both counts. I think it is cultural that those who create content are going to be expected to participate in revenue. I think it's just a fact of life with sort of this blockchain NFT culture.
Right.
So the answer is yes.
So there's another question that sort of relates to that, which is: how would NFTs differ from content authenticity initiatives tools, or other verification fact-checking organizations to assert provenance?
Yeah, great question. So we're working with Santi Leon over at the CAI. We sort of see it as like another layer of authenticity, another layer of certainty that the photo is accurate, legitimate, and not manipulated. So that's my sense of it at this point, how they go together. But again, early, and we'll see where the technology might lead us.
Yeah. Zack, one final question for you. We're bumping up against our deadline, which of course all journalists find very motivating. So Zack, excuse me, can you tell me just a little more about this Web3 thing that you're building? I'm super intrigued, and I'm sure lots of people in the audience are.
Yes. Yeah, basically, right now it's kind of exploring what all this technology can be used for. And the idea is basically in Web3, I guess we never really defined it, but you're moving into an area where there is no wall between content creator and audience. So what we're trying to do right now by building out a Web3 media startup is exploring what it means to break down that wall when you can bring other collaborators into the room, into the newsroom, if you will, and work on content that they can kind of work with you on, but then also enjoying the upside as this entity grows. So allowing them to kind of get in on the ground floor and help build it with us. But I think there's a lot of interesting things that are going to be happening here in the next year. Even though the market may look dead, excitement may be gone, I think we're at the stage where this technology is finally going to be applied to, I think, solve, as we discussed here on the panel today, a lot of pain points that exist in our industry. So stay tuned. I'll be speaking a little bit more on it at NFT NYC and another kind of area here in New York. But yeah, a lot to come there. We got like a month before we're out of stealth.
And just a couple of parting notes. There's so much to talk about.
So
we could go all day. But I would say, number one, there's a lot of sleazy characters in NFT land, a lot, and trust your gut. If something just looks really weird and slimy, trust your gut, because it's probably true. But at the same time, of course, there's incredibly legitimate development happening. Really smart people. So don't be fooled by the shiny objects that people are pushing. And then secondly, really quick, I think one area that we've not touched on that for this audience in particular is really, really interesting is application of blockchain technology for advertising and to create a better experience for the audience, the advertiser, and the media property. So lots online about that, but super interesting as a way to improve advertising.
Definitely a whole different discussion there, and a very rich seam to be mining. Well, I super appreciate the content, the contribution from both of you guys, and from the audience too. I have to say, in my world, in the crypto world, a lot of people are talking about this downturn, this shakeout, as being a time when the builders really get to work. It's when really good, solid projects start to get built and reinforced. And I think we'll see the same on the content creation side, the same on the content management side. So I think we're going to see some application of the technology that we've started to explore already really kind of flourish. And the next year or two will be a fascinating time. And glad that the two of you are here to help guide our understanding of that. So thank you for your time. Thank you very much to CUNY for arranging this. Been fascinating to be involved in it, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. Before you disappear, I'll just let you know that next up at 2 p.m. is the panel Designing a DAO for Your Brand. So Zach, you might want to stay online for that.
I may have to, but thanks again for chatting with us, Dan. Great job.
All right, thanks everyone, and thanks to the audience.
Have a great day, everyone.